Hi, I'm Hamish Black, and welcome to Writing on Games. A couple of things before we begin today. As you can probably tell by the title of the video, today I'm going to be talking about the newly released Hitman. Firstly, if the footage is choppy here, that's because my technical experience with the game matches that description. My processor isn't exactly top of the line, but combined with my R9 290, I've had no problems running many recent games at maximum settings and maintaining at least a solid 60 frames per second. With Hitman, however, the game has fluctuated wildly, even on the absolute lowest settings, with some areas giving me as high as 110 frames per second, and others dropping to sub-20 levels. This isn't even to make mention of the absolutely wild glitches, both superficial and outright game-breaking, that I've faced on every mission. Normally I would chalk this up to my own hardware, but a cursory Google search reveals many people facing similar problems on the PC version, and I can only hope these issues are patched soon. Secondly, and this is for the sake of disclosure, review code for this game was provided to me by Square Enix PR. A gesture I greatly appreciate, but one I feel I should make clear given my feelings on this game's rocky road to release. The question I have to ask myself is, if I wasn't given a review copy of this game, would I have bought it? The answer, unfortunately, is probably no. This is to say nothing of the game's quality, but put simply, the forced implementation of an episodic release schedule would have made it feel too much like a pre-order, and as everyone probably knows by this point, those are unwise, especially with episodic content where you have no idea what the deal is in terms of the quality or the release schedule of the other episodes. So yeah, just felt I should put out there that I get why people are upset about this game's release, and I urge you to take everything I say with this in mind. This opinion comes from someone who didn't have to pay for the game. With those caveats out the way then, I can finally start talking about the fact that, despite the myriad issues surrounding it, I cannot stop playing this game. Hitman is maybe the most absurd game I've played since Goat Simulator, and I say that with the utmost sincerity and appreciation. The Hitman series in general is one that I've always maintained a distant appreciation for, largely as a result of this absurdity. Despite borrowing and foregrounding the aesthetics of many different types of games, such as stealth, action or shooters, the games themselves are incredibly difficult to pigeonhole in such terms. With some exceptions, the stealth system is far from robust in the way that, for example, the Phantom Pain stealth system is, and the game's action and shooting are hampered by somewhat intangible feeling weapons, floaty aiming, and the fact that Agent 47 cannot take many bullets before going down. Now, if this game were going up against the likes of Metal Gear Solid or Call of Duty, then these things would undoubtedly be considered flaws, and their mere presence has turned many people off the games who were probably expecting more conventional stealth action mechanics. For me, however, the game comes closer to some bastardized form of chess than it does any conventional video game, where you wait for the enemy AI to align itself in just such a way as to expose a hole that the player proceeds to pierce. In fact, this is why Hitman Go on phones, and now on PC, worked so well. Hitman has always basically been about pieces on a board, or some kind of circuit board in which the player must find a way to place the metaphorical, or sometimes even literal, spanner in the works in order to disrupt the scripting of the AI so that the targets reveal themselves. In this sense, we can begin to talk about Hitman in terms of what it actually is. Not a shooter, not a stealth action game, but a toy box. A large, open-ended toy box which encourages improvisation to an extent that few of its contemporaries in more easily defined genres can match. Improvisation in particular is a point I'd like to focus on. In other artistic media, it is a concept often associated with the avant-garde, or at the very least a heightened sense of self-expression, free from the restrictions of formal guidelines and structures. I can only really comment on music, seeing as it's the art form I would consider myself to be most competent in, and the one in which I am most familiar and enthusiastic about the avant-garde. But when taken to its logical conclusion, that being free and total improvisation, the end result is often something akin to noise or chaos with very little resembling traditional forms of music. Examples of this can be found in the free jazz of Ornette Coleman, the harsh noise of Merzbow or Masona, and something nearing a combination of the two found in Peter Breutzmann's music, for example. This unorganised, on-the-fly style of creating art often opens up the creators to a myriad of potential mistakes, and to the uneducated ear can often come across sounding like a mess, or like things are going wrong. If you watch my video on music games, however, you'll know that mistakes in art are often the things that draw me to art the most. Exposing the flaws in something can open up a more intimate connection with the systems you as the audience are interfacing with. Their uncanny nature, that is to say, their resembling more traditionally codified structures of creation, yet not quite adhering to them, allows the audience to become more invested in what they are experiencing, if they are willing to put in the work to do so. Now, the reason I am going into so much detail regarding this is because I genuinely believe that Hitman in particular represents a lot of these qualities in ways that many aesthetically similar games do not allow. Hitman is absolutely one of the closest examples of a game allowing pure mechanical self-expression I've experienced of late. Many have compared the game to Ground Zeroes, mainly in derogatory terms due to the game's comparatively short length due to the lack of content at this stage. However, whilst Ground Zeroes felt like a very open game at the time, at its core it provided you with two very set objectives and merely opened up the routes you can take to get to those objectives. Hitman's alternate routes, on the other hand, fundamentally change how you play the game. In the one non-training mission the game provides at this point, a poxy amount of content when examined from a distance, you can overcome your set objectives in a number of ways. Do you want to disguise yourself as a waiter and serve the target a poisoned cocktail? How about getting the target out into the open by arranging a meeting with a man carrying incriminating documents? Or how about dressing up as one of the supermodels at the fashion show and strutting your way onto the catwalk? Or you could always take the identity of a sheikh and enter a secret auction making bids on secrets regarding worldwide security. Of course, all of these situations are programmed very specifically, and the AI follows paths that allow for this scripting to play out, but the way in which self-expression enters the picture is the way in which these things can and often do go wrong. In order to explain this, I'll go into a specific example. One of my favourite ways to go about killing one of the targets in this mission is to disguise myself as one of the supermodels in the show, who just happens to be close friends with the target and who bears a striking resemblance to the player character. The way this is supposed to play out is that you witness the model walking to a private place to make a phone call to the target. You then subdue him, take his clothes and his phone, and make another call to the target in which she tells you to meet her specifically after you have appeared on the catwalk. After you go and get your fabulous Michael Stipe makeup on and hit the catwalk, you are then granted a private meeting with the target, in which you can easily take her out without anyone noticing. In one of my playthroughs of the mission, I knew the way this very specific scripting would play out, so I waited until the model reached the point at which he would make the phone call, but decided to subdue him during the call in order to save time. Little did I know that doing this actually locks the player out of this particular path, as the model must complete his call to the target in order for you to be able to pick up his phone and make a subsequent call. Realising the potential gravity of my mistake, I continued down the path anyway, taking the model's disguise, getting my makeup done and taking part in the show. But then I was left with a conundrum. With this costume, I was still allowed access to every part of the palace, but the scripting was broken to the point that no matter how long I waited, I would never be granted a private meeting with the target. She would just continue around her clockwork AI path as if I had done nothing, even though I had just completed all the steps that, had the model completed his phone call, would have led to that private meeting. Now, this could have branched out into several other scripted events, such as stealing the fireworks remote to draw both targets out into the open, or poisoning one of the drinks the target takes on her scripted path. But instead, I chose to do things the old-fashioned way. I took out the one guard on the balcony with a silenced pistol before taking her out, allowing me to get away quickly as the guard's suspicions were steadily rising. At the point they figured out what was going on, I took the disguise of a waiter so they wouldn't know who to look for. And at this point, I was free to walk past said guards, frantically looking for a supermodel who had just shot 2 people in the head. This was a messy, off-the-cuff way to deal with the situation provided to me by the break in the AI scripting, but the inherent playfulness of the mechanics encouraged me to think outside the box and experiment with other options, all of which I had total control over as a player. My point here is that whilst in many other games these kind of exploitable and somewhat broken AI scripts would be considered flaws, in Hitman they become an inherent mechanic designed to recalibrate the way the player considers their approach, much like they are forced to recalibrate the nature of the game they are playing. The goal here is not to deal with the problems presented to you in a way that a normal human being would, or even in the way that other video games might teach the player to examine and approach these situations, but to view the characters as pieces in a board game, trying to arrange all the pieces in such a way that you can get in and out whilst causing the least commotion possible. In allowing for this kind of mechanical tomfoolery, The designers provide a true sense of improvisation within their systems. In other games, even ones considered to be open-ended, everything the player is allowed to do is heavily structured to the point where straying off the path is rarely encouraged. And when the game does break, it is often a stopping block to the player's progress, resulting in crashes or requiring a restart of sorts. Now, as I said previously, I have experienced these kind of game-breaking bugs in this game, but in Hitman, no matter how messy the final outcome may be, the designers back off enough to allow things to go wrong, both in the minutiae of the player's plan and in the fundamentals of the AI's scripting. This places control of the mission's moment-to-moment narrative directly in the hands of the player, and as a result deepens their connection to the game's mechanics and systems. Like improvisation in music recalibrates the listener's ear to look for things that might not be apparent in other, more formal types of music, Hitman's allowance for player improvisation forces the player to examine every part of the game differently from how they might view the same environments, AI patterns, and mechanics in any other games, no matter how aesthetically similar Hitman might be to those other games. In allowing for this, the game creates some of the most chaotic, messy, absurd, and hilarious moments I have experienced in a game in a long while. Like I say, probably not since Goat Simulator, thanks to the uncanny nature of a lot of these somewhat broken systems. This is to say nothing of the fact that the game's scripted sections themselves are somewhat inherently absurd. For example, the idea that you can disguise yourself as a mechanic to take a target through safety precautions for a jet that you've tampered with, sending him rocketing into the night as you instruct him to pull the ejector switch, or the fact that, like I say, you can disguise yourself as a supermodel before meeting up with someone with whom the model is supposed to be close friends with the target at no point realising that your voice is almost entirely different, or that you have a goddamn barcode on the back of your head. In all honesty, these scripted sections almost felt disappointingly rote. Like when you arrange a meeting for your target, forcing you to blend in as a bodyguard until the meeting is over, at which point the target just decides to dismiss his own bodyguard and places himself at a convenient point at which you can snap his neck without anyone knowing, or when, for example, you steal a fireworks trigger causing both targets to open themselves up outside, with one being conveniently placed right above the other, allowing you to push one off the balcony, crushing the other below. These scenarios, whilst fun to carry out initially, are far too convenient for a Hitman game in my opinion. As I hope I have proved through this piece, the real beauty of this game lies in its ability to eschew these scripted events, allowing the player total control over a situation in which almost everything seems to be simultaneously falling from the player's grasp. This is where the true absurdity lies, and therefore where the true fun lies as well in my opinion, as the player inherently feels more invested in the outcome that they create on the fly. As the late comedian Jonathan Winters once said, "I love improvisation. You can't blame it on the writers, you can't blame it on direction, you can't blame it on the camera guy. It's you, you're on. You've got to do it, and you either sink or swim with what you've got." And with that, I'm Hamish Black, and this has been yet another episode of Writing on Games. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.